But I think there's also a lot to be said about how much more vehemently people will come out to the rescue of the Jewish community for anti-Semitism than other communities. Other communities is kind of just, another day in the office type of deal.
I wanted to unpack that. The fact that, the reason why we talked about this topic was because Kanye being the platform for anti-Semitism, and there's no excuse, there's no room for it at all in any nation, in any country. And he also, JP Morgan Chase is stopped doing business with him as well. A lot of people don't even know that, but
I didn't know that. That's significant.
JP Morgan Chase is not doing business with Kanye anymore. But it just goes to show how what is allowed, what is allowed socially. So let me break it down. So as far as anti-Semitism, there's a no tolerance policy, as there should be, but we allow racism and sexism to become attached to large political parties, right? Mm-hmm. So you have to realize once something is accepted, once something is politicized and accepted in that society as being political, that manifests that ideology being circulated in a country, and also the opposite of that ideology being circulated. That's what's acceptable. For example, like the Black Lives Matter. I'm not a fan of the leadership of Black Lives Matter and how they handle things, but I'm not here to talk about that. I'm talking about Black Lives Matter is something that society we all should have agreed on, but we politicized it. So that allowed the other side of things, the All Lives Matter or the White Lives Matter crowd, to permeate within the society. If we talk about women and women should have autonomy over their bodies, that's not something that should be politicized. That's something that should be accepted across the entire nation. But since it's politicized, now that gives a light to the pro-life crowd. We can talk about the migrants who come here from Latin American countries seeking asylum, who are here legally. They politicize it, so that makes room for the other side to call them illegals, and that makes room for the other side to use some terminology that is not okay and shouldn't be accepted. Think about the last time that anti-Semitism was actually allowed to be politicized was Hitler, right? Mm-hmm. Hitler. And if we look back at Hitler, nobody cares about the accomplishments Hitler's ever made. And they shouldn't care because of his anti-Semitism, because of what he did. But conversely, when you talk about other leaders and other past leaders who might have not used anti-Semitism, they used racism as their backbone. What people want to do now, they want to talk about that person's accomplishments, right? They want to brush the racism aside and talk about that person's accomplishments, or even worse, we don't even know about him. So let me give you an example. So 30, 40 years before the Hitler regime, King Leopold II of Belgium, the second king of Belgium. This was a man who occupied the Congo from 1885 to 1909. And he was a brutal leader, and he was in the Congo for the rubber trade, the rubber. And he had the Congolese people work the land for him. And he was a ruthless leader who, if you didn't meet the quota that he set, he would literally cut off arms and hands of kids, babies. It doesn't matter. If you didn't meet the quota, they would literally chop your hand off. And he was a man who they estimate killed 10 million Congolese people. And we don't even know about him. And this was 30, 40 years before Hitler, So I'm just talking about bridging the gap between how anti-Semitism is treated amongst especially European countries as opposed to racism. King Leopold II is somebody that most people don't even know about. But when we look at what one of if you were to make a list of the worst people in some of the worst people in modern day history, Hitler's at the top of the list, as he should be. But nobody ever knows about King Leopold II because they don't care about Africa.
I think you made some very, very good points. One of the biggest questions is, how do we avoid politicizing issues? I think that's something very, very real to consider, and definitely something that'll, get us into, sociological perspectives, because that's very true. I mean, you look at somebody like Ronald Reagan, for instance. His whole platform, his entire platform was racist BS. But people want to talk about what he did for the economy. Well, he destroyed the economy, but not for everyone. So they'll talk about the gains that he made for corporate America. They'll talk about how he changed the culture at the expense of black people,
of
Latinos,
minorities, and poor people at the expense,
and that's acceptable.
And the point that you made, after Ronald Reagan, economists, they can look at the map, they can look at the chart. After his presidency, as far as the average person's income and the average happiness level of the average person, it started to decline, because we're in a society now where it's about money. It's not about the average person anymore. And I think the mark of a great society should be about the average person, not just the 1%, not just the people at the top who are making all of it. Yes, we have America is the most powerful. We have the most money out of any country, out of all the countries. But what percentage of the people have that? Mm-hmm. So I think the shift after Ronald Reagan was for corporate and less about for people.
Absolutely. And selling the dream that you too one day will be among the elite.
Absolutely. And it's all about dangling the carrot. It's all about dangling the carrot.
Mm-hmm. And, or think about like how the right wing in this country will completely deny the fact that people switched parties, that basically Democrats and Republicans switched, even though all you have to do is look at voting maps and see that, between this year and this year, red states and blue states completely shifted. And the fact that, political allegiances change as a matter of fact. That happens all the time, all over the world, for all types of reasons, especially within a two-party system. So it's like, no, that didn't happen. Why didn't it happen? Because then you wouldn't be able to acknowledge maybe a little bit of the gains that conservatives have made in this country. And like you said, with sexism too, especially, look at what they just did with Roe. We're seeing 10, 11-year-old girls go through stuff.
That's what I'm saying. They politicized it. Once you allow something to be politicized in a society, you make room for whatever that push, and you also make room for the opposite. You make room for both. Once something is allowed to be politicized from the masses. And you brought up a good point about the party switching. Right-wingers and conservatives love to bring up the fact that the Klan was started by Democrats, but who's in the Klan now?
Right.
They love to bring up the fact
140 years ago, the Republicans freed the slaves. Like, what about the after that? Yeah.
Lincoln was a Republican, right? And Republicans are the ones that are fighting to keep up Confederate statues and fly the Confederate flags now. So would they have supported Lincoln back then?
No, of course not.
That's what I'm saying. They always like to use the past, but it's all relative. The reason that, the most recent event that made the party switch was the Civil Rights Act of 1964. LBJ, Lyndon B. Johnson. So the Democrats, Dixiecrats, the Southern Dixiecrats, the racist Dixiecrats at the time, which Lyndon B. Johnson was, he signed the Civil Rights Act of 64, and they jumped ship. They were like, nope, Republican Party it is. We can't be associated with them, and that ushered in most of the blacks voting Democrat, and most Republican. And most the racists voting Republican.
And it's interesting too, because the switch was purely along racial lines, because
completely.
Because the Republican and the Democratic Party still fundamentally are about the same thing. So what I mean is, the Republican Party has always been like a less regulation, more free market, privatization, big business. They've always been that, always. The Democratic Party has always been more labor union focused, worker focused, workers' rights. That's always been the case. However, it was the racial issues that caused that main switch because
absolutely.
So,
as soon the Dixiecrats was like, we jumping ship, Republican Party it is, and now LBJ, for whatever reason that he signed it, now all the blacks are like, okay, this is my party now. So that's the reason, that's the reason why the recent switch. But they've been flip-flopping back and forth for years.
Yeah, and again, especially too, considering like when you have a two-party system, you're just dealing with whatever the pathway of least resistance is. You know what I'm saying?